Hello friends, Nayaswami Hriman here once again, broadcasting to you from the Camino Hermitage on beautiful Camino Island. Today I'm switching my intention in subject matter, but I'd like to start with a poem and I'll explain the other in just a moment. This is a poem by Paramhansa Yogananda that was published on the last page of one of his monthly or bi-monthly magazines. I think in the 30s, I'm not sure. The Great Light Land. I have been roaming in endlessness in the fire mist of the Great Light Land. In that luminosity, I read the meaning of all mysteries, scribbled on the scrolls of all time. I am half-awakenedly enjoying the dream of earth life, and while I am dreaming, I sip the joys from the cup of delicious meditations. O blessedness, walk with me in my kingdom of royal happiness, and keep me free from the dream nightmare of trialsome life. We do have some trialsome life these days and these last couple of years with the pandemic throughout the world. And now we have the beginnings of what I suppose could become a third world war. So we do have our trials, but I found just so wonderful from the cup of delicious meditations. How often, I'm happy to say, that I have drunk from that cup of delicious meditations. Every cell of the body just thrills with like little cups of nectar, happiness. And so this is what the spiritual life offers, and especially, more particularly, not just a spiritual life of moral behavior and participating in rituals and good deeds. All of those have their place. But we're talking here, and Ananda is a representative of that spirituality which is considered not religious, although I wouldn't put it that way. I think spirituality is the purpose of religion, and religion can help foster the blossoming of spirituality. But I want to move on to a different subject, not wholly unrelated. I had in mind something else today, but as I went for a run today, I listened to a talk given by my old friend Alan Watts. Now, most of you youngsters don't have a clue who he was, but in the 60s and early 70s on college campuses throughout Europe and America, Alan Watts was the prophet of Hinduism, the prophet of Sanatana Dharma, the prophet of, now the term I forget, but Aldous Huxley's Perennial Philosophy. He was the prophet. Now, I will admit up front that my beloved dear friend who has given me spiritual life, Swami Kriyananda, God bless his soul, did not have much respect for Alan Watts. Alan Watts was, I'm told, alcoholic, and from listening to his voice, I'd say he was a smoker, and I suspect he may have belonged to that genre of spiritual teachers in the 60s who more or less said that if it scratches, itch it, or if it itches, scratch it. And, I think of Osho and the crazy wisdom teachers. We saw this in some of the Buddhist teachers when they would, drink and fornicate and call it spiritual. I don't know that Alan Watts did any of those things, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did. But no matter. I honor him because myself and maybe millions of others like myself were really introduced in a way we could understand to the precepts of self-realization. I don't recall that he himself used that term particularly. He often used the term Hinduism. I would say his knowledge of Indian teachings was not superficial, but certainly not of a devotional and experienced way. I would say what he taught was what he learned, and I'm not sure how much of what he learned he experienced. But nonetheless, he was both clever and witty, which always makes for a good speaker, but he had some deep insights. One of his books that I recall are The Two Hands of God. He spoke a lot about duality and the dreamlike nature of reality. But what I want to bring up was something I heard in today's talk that I listened to, which is a perennial issue, and it has to do with our feelings. And his essay, his lecture, was leaning heavily in the direction of endorsing our feelings, which I don't disagree with. I mean, rather than suppressing them, certainly. We all know that. Even the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, what avails suppression? But still, his inclination, given who he was and the times in which he lived and so on, was perhaps to imply more than even he, at least intellectually, would have recognized. For example, he said, just because you feel you hate someone doesn't necessarily mean you should act on that. And yes, what he was positing, you see, was the perennial conflict that we see in the life of Jesus between the rules of society and the rules specifically of religion and the inspiration and the higher consciousness of the spirit, of the soul. And a religionist who obeys all the rules but has no real love for God is a hypocrite. That's not really a new teaching. Jesus very dramatically identified that. And it's far less of an issue, socially speaking, now than it was in his generation, which would have been of the more or less the first half of the 20th century, the tail end of the Victorian era, things like that, where, and we see this throughout the world, a tendency to do the right thing, but not feel in tune with doing the right thing. But nonetheless, even though now we have a much more permissive society, people can, if it itches, they scratch it nowadays, and with wild abandon. So why would I bring this up? It's hardly an issue anymore. Well, it is nonetheless an issue for those who are on the spiritual path, for those who are aspiring towards perfection, how to deal with the feelings that we have that are not in tune with our beliefs, are not things that we're supposed to express. I'm going to put aside the issue of outward expression for the moment, because that's so unique to each situation. But I will say this in the matter of outward expression, that Watts very cleverly, I thought very insightfully walked the audience through a person, let's say two people, they're having an interaction, and let's say, I really don't like you, but society and my own beliefs constrain me to be polite. That's okay. It happens all the time, I guess. But then he went through a kind of a role-playing thing in which I would say, I really don't like you. And he was promoting self-honesty in the sort of American style that we don't, and Swami Kriyananda didn't promote. He said, and as the Yogananda said sometimes, if you want to be happy, act happy. And sometimes, Watts was saying that the outer expression, if it's not in tune with your inner feelings, is hypocritical. But it's possible, and Yogananda put it this way, that if we smile, we can perhaps dispel the gloom of our mood. In other words, Watts was talking about being genuine with the inside feelings. But it's also true, in fact, the more prevalent truth is most people act from the outside in. They try to behave properly, and here's the thing, if they are sincerely wanting to behave properly, and then do so even against their feelings, they can change their feelings, because even as Watts put it, feelings are like clouds in the sky, they just come and go. I can say to you, I think you're a schmuck. And then after a while, what happens is when the feeling dissipates, we can laugh about it. You see, that's what his point was. I'm not saying it's always true, but I am saying that sometimes and Yogananda taught this, that sometimes the outer affirmation of the feeling or the attitude that we are seeking can help awaken the inner feeling, because none of those feelings, good, bad, or indifferent, are of our true nature. In fact, really, our true nature is transcendent of even the good feelings, as far as, philosophy is concerned. And so, dealing with those, that conflict, which I admit was much more of that generation, which includes to some degree my generation. I think a book that meant a lot to me when I was maybe a late teenager was The Scarlet Letter by Hawthorne, in which this woman, I guess she had a child, I don't remember, but anyway, this young woman falls in love with this pastor, and they have an affair, and it ends badly, let's just put it that way. But society imposed on them, they could not, come together or whatever. And the reason that book was so important to my generation in our early years was that it was a condemnation effectively to the taboos of society, against which people in my generation were quite rebellious of. And that has continued, that permissiveness, or that if it itches, scratch it kind of thing. So these things all have their place, but as we become more refined in our consciousness, it's very important to figure out how to deal responsibly and effectively with those feelings we do have, in order to align them with our beliefs, but with that delicious meditation I talked about, also with what we know is even more true and more who we want to be. And so it's an important subject. And I delight in the fact that sometimes one of the things I delight in Swami Kriyananda was his complete naturalness. I don't think I ever heard him say to anybody, "You're a schmuck," but he was always polite, yes, but sometimes disarmingly honest. And there's a place for that, you see. And as it comes to those feelings that we have that we're not necessarily proud of, and probably shouldn't put out there, express an outer expression, we do need to deal with that, though, you see. And so the inner path of meditation, we can take that. And I remember Swami Kriyananda would say, if you see a beautiful sunset, and I see this all the time with my nature-loving friends, it's like they love nature, but unlike St. Francis, they love nature for itself, not for its expression of God. And so if we have we find that we have a feeling, a desire, an emotion that we actually, at least in our intellect, would rather not have, then we don't suppress it, accept it, and then offer it back to God. And if you must use your intellect at all, say that this is a reflection of what I'm truly seeking, but this by itself will not bring that to me. And so it all has to do, as Alan Watts said, with dealing honestly, self-honestly, with whatever we have. Well, my time is running amok as usual, and my tongue is running amok as usual. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But this is my tribute to my spiritual friend, Alan Watts, wherever he be, and may his soul rest in peace. All right.